What's going on? YouTube, listen up. Young Elder Gang. This is Dr. Charles P. Winston. At you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture, information, and, best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth, keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it. Today, be sure to hit that like button, Young Elder Gang, hit that subscribe button. If you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. In the American South, the church was both a sanctuary and a battleground. For generations of enslaved black people, it was a rare place where they could gather, find solace, and share in a sense of community, even as the world outside was marked by oppression and violence. Yet this sanctuary was also a site of control, where the enslaved were watched closely and their spiritual lives were shaped by the demands of those who held power over them. The pulpit, which should have been a place for truth, hope, and guidance, was often shackled by the expectations of the slaveholding class. Preachers were not free to speak their hearts or share the full message of the scriptures. Black preachers were forced to deliver sermons that reinforced the system of slavery, preaching obedience and submission rather than liberation and justice. Their words were carefully monitored, and any hint of resistance could bring swift and brutal punishment. Overseers stood at the back of the church, policing every word, every gesture, ensuring that nothing was said that might inspire hope for freedom or rebellion. Any deviation from the approved message was met with harsh consequences. The core doctrine imposed on these congregations was brutally simple: obey your earthly master, accept your suffering, and wait patiently for your reward in heaven. Resistance was forbidden, and questioning the system was dangerous. The congregation listened in silence, their heads bowed, forced to accept a version of faith that denied their dignity and humanity, while clinging to the hope that one day justice would come. Even the Bible itself was edited and manipulated, with passages about freedom, deliverance, and justice removed or hidden, leaving only those that justified slavery and submission. But beneath the surface, a different story was unfolding. In secret gatherings, away from the watchful eyes of overseers, black preachers and congregations found ways to resist. They whispered forbidden stories, sang coded songs, and shared messages of hope and liberation. This script will explore why these official sermons were chosen, what powerful stories were left out, and how black preachers and their congregations found ways to keep their true faith alive, hidden behind closed doors, in coded words, and in the quiet strength of their community. Even in the deepest darkness, hope found a way to endure. Through faith, resilience, and quiet acts of resistance, the spirit of a people survived and grew stronger, lighting the path toward freedom. The first sermon delivered to enslaved congregations was not one of hope or liberation, but a demand for unwavering obedience. In the dim light of those humble churches, the message was clear and chilling. "Slaves, obey your earthly masters," preachers were forced to say, their voices heavy with the weight of words they did not choose. These verses, plucked from scripture, were wielded as weapons, echoing through the wooden pews. This message twisted sacred scripture into a tool of control, equating loyalty to the master with loyalty to God himself. The overseers watched closely, ensuring every word reinforced the plantation's order. Preachers, under the constant threat of punishment, had to return home and tell their own families that their suffering was somehow righteous, that their chains were divinely sanctioned. The pain of this betrayal was felt in every whispered conversation after the service. The congregation, forced to listen, was told to love those who could sell or punish them at will. The words hung heavy in the air, a bitter command that demanded the impossible. This doctrine was designed to break the spirit, to crush resistance before it could even form. It aimed to make subjugation feel natural, to turn faith into a shackle that bound the soul as tightly as any chain. The church, once a place of refuge, became a stage for forced loyalty. Every sermon was monitored, every prayer scrutinized for the slightest hint of dissent. The preacher's words were not his own, but those of the oppressor. Slaveholders used this spiritual policing to prevent rebellion and justify their power, twisting faith into a justification for cruelty. The church was no longer just a house of worship, it was a tool of surveillance and control. The result was a faith weaponized to keep people in chains, both physically and spiritually. The Bible, meant to offer hope, was used to reinforce despair. Yet, beneath the surface, true beliefs survived in silence. In quiet prayers and secret glances, the congregation held on to hope, nurturing a faith that could not be broken, even in the darkest of times. The second sermon promised relief, but only after death. "Store your treasures up in heaven" is a biblical physiological tactic used by Christian colonizers from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:19-21, that encourages prioritizing eternal spiritual values over temporary earthly possessions. This means investing in actions like acts of kindness, obedience and generosity, as these are seen as treasures that will last forever, unlike money and material goods which are subject to destruction and theft. The principle is that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, meaning that where you focus your efforts and resources will determine what you truly value. Preachers painted heaven as the only escape from suffering, urging patience and endurance. Slaveholders promoted this message to keep the enslaved docile, discouraging any hope for justice on earth. Religion became a sedative, numbing pain and channeling hope into the afterlife. For slaveholders, this justified their cruelty. They claimed to save souls while destroying lives. For the enslaved, heaven was both comfort and a tool of control. Spirituals reflected this yearning, but also masked deeper desires for freedom. The focus on future reward was meant to suppress any thought of liberation now. Still, the dream of freedom persisted, hidden in song and spirit. The so-called slave master encouraged religious leaders to focus solely on heavenly rewards for a less privileged group, as a means of maintaining their own social and economic position. This approach was a strategy to discourage challenges to the existing power structure. By emphasizing that true rewards are in the afterlife, the message diverted attention from present-day economic inequality and the need for social or political change, helping to maintain the status quo that benefits the powerful group. Religious teachings that encourage obedience and focus on delayed gratification in heaven could lead to a population less likely to challenge authority or demand better conditions in the present. A focus on spiritual and eternal matters, rather than immediate material or political issues, hinder the formation of movements seeking economic justice or political power among the less privileged group. Historically, dominant groups have sometimes encouraged religious messages that implicitly or explicitly suggest that the current distribution of wealth and power is divinely ordained and should not be questioned. This type of message encourages individuals to accept their current economic or social circumstances as temporary earthly trials that will be rewarded in heaven, rather than seeking to change those circumstances in the present world. The Pope and his crowned constituents benefit from religious messaging that encourages a less privileged group to accept their current situation and not strive for fundamental shifts in the distribution of wealth or power on earth. The third sermon demanded non-resistance. Turn the other cheek. Slaveholders twisted Jesus' words into a command for total submission. This teaching was meant to prevent rebellion and justify violence against the enslaved. Week after week, people were told to accept abuse without protest. The message aimed to crush the instinct for self-defense and protect the white power structure. Any act of resistance was labeled sinful, justifying harsh punishment. This doctrine enforced powerlessness, but could not erase the desire for dignity. The true meaning of faith was kept alive in private hearts. Even in silence, the will to resist endured. The black Christian codes, under orders of the Pope, wanted black preachers to exclusively teach "turn the other cheek" to promote pacifism and non-violence, potentially to de-escalate racial tensions by emphasizing a strategy of non-violent resistance and forgiveness over retaliation. This was a political or social strategy to control conflict and avoid direct confrontation, framed as a spiritual lesson, especially if the Pope or government believed this black preacher could be particularly persuasive or influential within a specific community, as explained by Tilma Parish and Michael Parle. The most direct reason was a desire to promote a doctrine of pacifism, where specific black preachers are tasked with the important role of instilling non-violent resistance in a community, like Martin Luther King. When heightened racial tension, the government and Pope seen turning the other cheek as a way to de-escalate conflict and prevent violent outbursts from being oppressed, framing it as a religious imperative to avoid retaliation. Leveraging a specific preacher's influence like Al Sharpton. The white colonizers choose particular black preachers due to their perceived charisma or influence within the community, believing they are the ideal messenger for a message of forgiveness and non-resistance, similar to how some preachers were used during revivals. It was strategic, not theological reasoning. The instruction was based on a political or social calculation rather than a purely theological one. By limiting the message, the Pope could be aiming to manage the community's response to injustice or oppression in a way that he sees as politically beneficial or less confrontational for the Church as an institution. Some might interpret turning the other cheek as a form of spiritual discipline that requires a person to stand their ground without resorting to violence, while others may see it as a more literal call to non-resistance, as discussed in Dr. Alison Cook. In this view, the white colonizers were enforcing a specific interpretation of this teaching within a community. On historical events such as so-called slavery and the Jim Crow era, some white people wanted black preachers to only teach the concept of "turn the other cheek" and other messages of non-resistance and obedience to maintain social control and suppress rebellion. Encouraging non-retaliation and obedience was a strategic way to prevent enslaved people and later black citizens from resisting their oppression or organizing rebellions. The message of passive acceptance of suffering helped maintain the existing power structure. By promoting a version of Christianity that emphasized servitude and a heavenly reward for a hard life on earth, white people could find moral justification for the brutal institution of slavery and later the demeaning system of Jim Crow. It helped them believe the system was divinely sanctioned. Messages focusing solely on spiritual matters and turning the other cheek discouraged black communities from engaging in political activism or challenging the authority of white people and the discriminatory laws they enforced. Providing an emotional outlet through religion, while simultaneously channeling that faith toward passive acceptance, was a method of psychological pacification. It offered hope of a better afterlife, which some slaveholders believed would make enslaved people less likely to seek freedom in their current lives. Sermons were often tailored to reinforce the idea that black people were cursed to be servants or occupied a lower social tier in a Christian hierarchy, making their subjugated status seem natural or God-given. White authorities often monitored black religious gatherings, and ensuring preachers only taught safe messages was a way to prevent the formation of autonomous black communities or the development of black liberation theology that challenged white supremacy. The goal was to use a specific, selective interpretation of Christian teachings as a tool for social and economic control, rather than allowing a more complete reading of the Bible that also contains powerful themes of liberation and justice, which resonated deeply with the enslaved. These 3 sermons were chosen with purpose, to create a closed system of control. Obedience deferred hope, and non-resistance worked together to suppress any challenge to slavery. Slaveholders, politicians, and white clergy enforced this doctrine through law and violence. Black preachers who strayed from the script faced severe punishment. The entire Southern order depended on this spiritual manipulation. White religious leaders justified slavery as divinely ordained, publishing pro-slavery theology and editing the Bible itself. The goal: prevent unity and uprising among the enslaved. The pulpit, once a source of hope, was turned into a tool of oppression. But the true gospel could not be fully silenced. Master-approved sermons, white slaveholders often appointed or oversaw preachers, both white and sometimes black, to deliver a partial gospel designed to maintain social control. The key themes were obedience, docility, and the promise of a better afterlife as a reward for faithful service on earth. Verses like, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear," Ephesians 6:5, were emphasized, while masters' obligations to treat slaves fairly were often ignored. These controlled sermons were intended to convince the enslaved that their servitude was God's will. The most powerful biblical stories, Moses, the prophets, Jesus' radical teachings, were deliberately omitted. The Exodus, a story of God siding with the oppressed, was too dangerous to preach. Prophets who demanded justice were silenced, their words erased from sermons. Even Jesus' calls for liberation and equality were ignored, replaced with messages of meekness. This spiritual theft denied the enslaved a faith that could empower them. The Bible was stripped of its liberating power, leaving only a gospel of submission. Yet the stories survived in whispers and secret gatherings. The enslaved found ways to reclaim the message of freedom. The God of liberation was never truly forgotten. Despite surveillance, enslaved people created secret spaces, hush harbors, where true faith could flourish. In hidden gatherings, they reclaimed the stories of Moses and the Exodus. These meetings were acts of courage, risking brutal punishment for spiritual freedom. Worship was vibrant, blending African traditions with Christian hope. Spirituals carried coded meanings, signaling escape or warning of danger. The Hush Harbour was the heart of the invisible black church, a place of resistance and affirmation. Here, faith became a source of strength and hope for liberation. These gatherings sowed the seeds of future freedom movements. The spirit of resistance was kept alive, even in the shadows. Black preachers and congregations mastered the art of coded language. Spirituals like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Follow the Drinking Gourd carried secret messages of escape. Sermons used biblical metaphors, Canaan, the Promised Land, to inspire hope for freedom. This double meaning allowed them to resist openly yet safely. Coded language built solidarity and kept the dream of liberation alive. Preachers became experts in signifying, speaking truth beneath the surface. Even under constant threat, their creativity and resilience endured. The oppressors heard submission, the oppressed heard hope. Through song and story, the message of freedom survived. The legacy of this era is both painful and profound, echoing through generations. The story of black faith in America is marked by deep suffering, but also by extraordinary strength and hope. In the shadow of oppression, African American communities gathered in churches that became sanctuaries, places where sorrow was shared and resilience was born. The forced sermons left scars that ran deep, reminders of a time when faith was used as a tool of control. Yet, even as these sermons tried to break spirits, they could not extinguish the inner light of those who listened. The Bible, held in trembling hands, became a symbol of both suffering and survival. In secret, the enslaved reclaimed their faith, gathering under the cover of darkness in hush harbours, far from the eyes of their oppressors. Here they found comfort in shared prayers and whispered hymns, forging a tradition of resistance that would shape generations. These hidden gatherings were acts of quiet defiance, where hope was nurtured and the seeds of liberation were sown. After emancipation, the Black Church became a centre for justice, a beacon of hope in a world still marked by inequality. It was within these sacred walls that a theology of liberation took root, inspiring men and women to fight for their rights and dignity. Leaders like Dr. King drew on this legacy, standing on the shoulders of those who came before. They spoke with the authority of history, calling their people to action and unity. Demanding freedom in the language of Exodus and the prophets, they reminded their congregations that their struggle was part of a much larger story, a story of deliverance, faith, and unyielding hope. The story of the three sermons is one of oppression, but also of unbreakable hope. Even in the darkest times, the yearning for freedom could not be crushed. The church, divided by slavery, became a place where the dream of liberation was kept alive. Through faith, through song, and through courage, the enslaved and their descendants kept the vision of liberation alive. Their voices rose in spirituals and gospel songs, carrying messages of hope and endurance. The power of music and worship became a lifeline, a way to express both pain and joy and to build community in the face of adversity. Their spirit, tempered in fire, was passed down from generation to generation. Emerging stronger, they lit the way for those who would follow. Today, the legacy of hope and resilience continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the face of great suffering, the human spirit can rise, endure, and shine brightly for generations to come.